Hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Wyrick, and I'm the Chief Curator and Director of Audience Engagement at the New Children's Museum. So lovely to see you all here. Let's have a round of applause for this event and gathering together today. So today, we are here to honor the New Children's Museum's latest exhibition, Octavia E. Butler Seeding Futures, which opened last night at our reception and today to the public. If you haven't seen it already, I hope you go and see it. I'm biased, of course, but I think it's an incredible exhibition, and we're so excited to have it at the New Children's Museum. So this exhibition has been many years in the making, and it's only been made possible by a collective of artists, partners, and of course, the legacy of Octavia E. Butler herself. On behalf of our entire team at the New Children's Museum, I know many of our staff are in the audience today, I'll start by thanking our partners who provided important planning and programming support for the exhibition. Thank you to the Getty Foundation, Prebys Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, California Humanities, and the City of San Diego through the Commission for Arts and Culture. We deeply appreciate your support. And today we're honored to be in this space with members of the Seeding Futures Collective, a group of artists, writers, scholars who joined together to collaborate on the content, components, and programming that brought this exhibition to life. I personally am so grateful to them. So all of you Seeding Futures Collective members, thank you so much. That's enough talking from me, but before I leave, I'm just gonna give a little bit of information about our incredible moderator. So our moderator for today's discussion is an educator, mythologist, and depth psychologist. She is the founder of the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network, a global community committed to highlighting the life and work of Octavia E. Butler while creating new works inspired by her legacy. Also, Dr. Ayana Jamieson is the advising curator of our Octavia E. Butler Seeding Futures exhibition. So please join me in showing all the love to Dr. Ayana Jamieson. And one thing I'll say before I turn the mic over to you, Ayana, is if you haven't given the registration desk your email yet, please do. After this event, we're sending an email that will be a pass to come to the New Children's Museum for free, so all of you can experience Octavia E. Butler Seeding Futures in person. Thank you all for being here today, and I'm turning it over to you, Ayana.
So, because our panelists and I know each other well, I'm going to forgo the very long and kind of embarrassing bios, because when you're sitting there listening to people read about you, you just cringe inside the whole time while you're smiling, so I'm not going to do that. But I will welcome these two individuals up with me and tell you a tiny bit about them. Lynell George is a very brilliant writer, a person who has written about Los Angeles and various places in the world, is very accomplished and has a very beautiful book that you see right on the screen called A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, The World of Octavia E. Butler, which talks about Butler's writing life. So Lynell, would you please come up to the stage? An American Artist is an internationally recognized artist who has many, many accolades, but also grew up in Pasadena and went to the same high school as Octavia E. Butler and has a very unique perspective. And so, American, if you could come on up. So this is how things will go. We'll be in conversation for about 40 minutes, and then I will ask you to talk to your neighbor like the Black church, and you will talk about your comments and the things that occur to you. And I want you to keep in mind whether or not it's really a question you want to ask on the card to pass up to us, or you're just eager and full of love and wanting to talk to someone else. So I'm just saying full disclosure, I do this all the time, and I want our time together to be succinct and for everyone to be able to connect with one another in community. So welcome to the panel. Thank you to the estate. Thank you to all of our funders and every single person in the collective, as well as all of the people from the Children's Museum who make this programming possible. Thank you so much. So my first question is maybe if you all could tell your own bios. Tell us something about yourself and your connection to Octavia E. Butler, and something that from her life or work that maybe sparked some of your creative work. And then we'll sort of go from there. Would you like to go first?
Okay, I will start. Hi, I'm Lynell George, and my first, I'm gonna try to really condense this. My first experience with meeting Octavia Butler in person was back in 1994, but probably even before that when I was a kid or a younger person. And I had her sign my hardcover copy of Parable of the Sower. Little did I know that I would be sitting here on this stage now and having been working with you and so many others in an archive and spreading the word about her. But the time I did get to see her in person was in Seattle. It was a couple of years before she passed away. She was the keynote speaker at the Black to the Future Festival. And she was outstanding. It was so moving. And she had a standing ovation. She gave this speech, which encouraged us all in that room to connect with one another, because she had not been able to be in spaces like that and be with people of color who were doing creative endeavors across genre. And I sat with that. So fast forward to 2015, I have coffee with Julia Meltzer, who is the founder and executive director of Clock Shop. It's a nonprofit in Los Angeles, arts nonprofit. And she had this idea to do I guess we could call it a
posthumous interview.
Yes.
Some kind of conversation with Octavia Butler that would elucidate how she felt about herself. So that's the prompt that Lynell started with.
That's what got me in.
And that's around the time when we met, when Lynell was doing some research in the archives.
Right.
And I've been doing research in the archives since it opened. So we have lots of interesting conversations as this piece was developing.
Yes, over time, it's definitely true. And that's got me on the path of spending time with her writing life. And I was really curious as a young person who also adored libraries, whose mother took her to the library. It was a sanctuary for me after school. Would walk to the library after school to wait for her to pick me up from the library. So I saw a lot of connections with Octavia and the writing. This is sort of nonstop writing and these notebooks. I felt like there was immediate connection.
Yeah, so my name is American, and thank you to Ayana for inviting me to be part of this. I really had a deep dive into Butler when I discovered we had gone to the same high school. I think, I don't know, before that I had known of her writing, but for some reason that was the thing that really sort of pulled me in, because I started to think about what her experience must have been living there and growing up there, and thinking about the type of work she was making in relationship to the development of rocket science within Pasadena, as well as the large science fiction community, the presence of Black families in Los Angeles and Pasadena, and just all of these things that I also had a relationship to, and trying to I don't know, kind of figure out I don't know what it is that makes creative people arise there, I guess, and trying to find some sort of I don't know, sort of ancestral, what can you show me that I didn't already know about this place, I think. So that's kind of where I got involved in it. And at the time that I started making work around Butler, I'd done a lot of work around critiques of policing and policing technologies and surveillance, and anti-Blackness in technological design and things like that. And I was starting to feel a little bit burnt out around the policing work, and I was trying to find a way to make work that I felt like I could explore a lot of these same ideas, but maybe through an avenue that had this aspect of like a sort of speculative like possibility or something, and I felt like Butler had already written about so many of these things, and so if I could sort of look at things through her work and through her life, maybe I could like, you know, in one sense like draw this relation between what I was seeing and what she was seeing, but also think about these issues through this frame of maybe like a speculative future, and also, as she says, like, what's the phrase? Like, I don't know, like writing like cautionary tales, you know, about like what's going to happen if we don't get our stuff together. So that's really what it was for me that pulled me in.
Oh, I love those answers. See, this is why we don't prepare, because I know that they have it. And what you both highlighted was this connection in your individual work, because they've never met before now, but I know them both. This is their first time meeting in these last 24 hours as we open the event. So this is why, like, you all will thank me later, because this is my superpower. But there is a connection in American's work and in Lynell's work and some of my own. And when I do like census research or teach African-American contemporary experience or historical experience, I look for my family in the and my in-laws, right? I look for people to see like, how are they documented? How are they recorded? How do they name themselves? So in terms of the great migration and coming out of the South or back East and other places, there's some overlaps in Lynell's and American's work that I find really, really fascinating. And so I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about what does that mean for us to sort of be the products of people leaving a place where they did not feel safe and whole and where their children could not live or have a chance at survival, and just like getting up and leaving, right? We are sort of, there's a quote from Walida Imarisha in Octavia's Brood that basically says that all organizing is science fiction, and that your ancestors bent reality, like you're like science fiction on two legs, like they bent reality to create this space that we have now. And I find that this moment is like that, right? Where there's a sense that Butler was not just a writer, she's actually documenting our times. She was involved in the civil rights movement. You know, Mailana Karenga came to her campus, and very much in the forefront of all these things that we're looking at in history books. So for me, that's part of the appeal, because you find out like, oh, this person was here, or she saw that, or she wrote about this law changing. So I wonder if you all could talk about some of your sense of the Great Migration and sort of that dreaming us into reality and being in this West Coast space and what that's meant for folks, or how that's shown up in your work.
You know, it's a story that I keep returning to, and as I got older, especially as a journalist and writing about Los Angeles, there's a huge Texas and huge Louisiana community. They're all migrants, and I grew up. My mother is from New Orleans, and deep roots in New Orleans. So I'm the first person born in Los Angeles, and everybody else Louisiana. And so even when I go back to New Orleans, I went to the museum to do some research. There's a research center there, the Williams Research Center, and I was signing in my papers, and the gentleman working behind the counter looked at my zip code and said, "Oh, you're one of those great migration families." And I didn't know what to do with that, because there's this, like, you fled, you left, you know, even though it wasn't me. It was my people did, and we didn't, actually, you know, because I have a very strong connection. And why it's so important to me is that I realized as I got older and was in these communities of other migrants, you know, we lived in a neighborhood that was very Louisiana and very Texas. It was in Los Angeles, but everybody brought pieces of that. So storytelling, language, music especially. You know, I grew up, so I felt like even though, and I was going back every year to see my grandfather, and that was important too, for language and the earth. And that was like going in the archive and seeing that Octavia had New Orleans roots. I would see in her mother's journal, she would write New Orleans, you know, what the year they left, Louisiana, all of that. So I'm realizing, like, You know, we all tried to come here and set something up, but didn't forget the family. And that's the part, I think, that's so important to me in telling this story.
The thing that I was thinking about at the time I started getting into like researching Octavia Butler was thinking about like Black people specifically migrating to like Los Angeles and the West Coast, because when we think about the Great Migration, it's usually associated with like New York or Chicago or like moving north. And something that I've, you know, heard informally referred to as like second Great Migration, but that like there was a significant number of Black people that did go west. And so that to me felt like also sort of connection with her own family's migration. In my family, it was like my mom's side was from Oklahoma to Arizona to Los Angeles, and then my dad's side was Tennessee to Los Angeles. And so just sort of, yeah, seeing some sort of, you know, pattern in that desire to create a new life for oneself. And also one kind of like chapter, as I think of it in this work that I've been doing, is really thinking about Octavia Butler's sort of matrilineal heritage, like her deep connection to her mom and grandmother, and their movement from Louisiana to California. And I've been thinking a lot about this chicken farm that her grandmother had in Apple Valley, like in the desert, as like this sort of moment of like placemaking or trying to create autonomy or like a new life for oneself. And so I don't know, that just feels like such an important part of the work that like precedes anything that she's writing about, but like is so informative for what she's doing.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's like the survival narrative. And my grandparents had a chicken farm in the same area, and my mom remembers going there during this period of time. So it's just a weird thing. You don't think of it being a place where anyone is living, right? And Butler writes about how the desert is like this alien landscape, and it's so, so detailed, and it's such, like, and then when you go there, you realize what she was describing, but it's like, you know, a few paragraphs in Clay's arc, or it's like something that seems like it's inconsequential, but it's really like being embedded in this environment. So I sort of want to pivot a little bit and talk about another theme that sort of came up in what you were saying, is in terms of being in California and all of the things that are here. And it's very interesting to me that although many people have been reading Butler since she was first published, she's become very, very, like people are very, very interested in her work now. And I find it fascinating. I just wonder, what are your thoughts on that? My Jamaican father calls that like Johnny come lately.
Yes.
But I do think, you know, if you're not aware or you don't know, or maybe you're not sure that you've seen something, somebody will be like, oh, I had this they'll describe a novel to me. And I'm like, oh, you read that? That's Octavia Butler. But they won't realize they read it. So I wonder, like, what do you think about how there's so many people who are interested in her published work, even though many people have been doing work on it for a long time? Especially coming from Pasadena, like growing and living in Pasadena presently. And having been a reporter for, like, I just feel like it's an interesting thing to note in this point in the timeline, which is 2024.
Right. The year. That's a hard question, because I do, like, we've talked about this a lot. And it does feel, you know, I say to people, you know, my introduction to Octavia really was my mother, who was an English teacher. I actually have her mass market paperback copies of Dawn, Clay's Arc, and what's the other one I have? I'm trying to remember now. But she used to have, she used to keep her classroom open at lunchtime for students of color, especially who were being bused. She was way on the West Side. She'd been in back then, an inner city school for most of her career, but when they started to bus kids from those schools to other schools, she volunteered to be home base. And so she kept her classroom open. And so she purposely brought books like Octavia Butler to the classroom to give to kids so that they would have, if they thought they weren't interested in reading, if they didn't see themselves on the pages, or they were having trouble dreaming up futures, it was there, and she was there, and that was important to her. So it was funny to have like all of this excitement and thinking, I know about Octavia Butler, and yes, not to be a snob about it, but more about like, it made me wish that more people had had experiences where there was somebody putting these books in their hand. They were on a syllabus. I know that's truer now, even before this, but that's one of the things I think about this time. American?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, like, you have this pattern, I think, in the arts as well, of, like, people love to celebrate someone after they're gone, and it's like, while they're here, there's never as much attention. And, yeah, I think something else that I've been thinking about is, like, how a lot of the portrayal or talk about her work, like, a lot of people that haven't really deeply engaged with the work, they kind of describe it, like, very, like wholesome, in the sense, like, there are some wholesome aspects, but, like, these are not, like, nice stories. You know, they're very violent, they're very, like, politically, like, polarizing, and, like, that's something that I kind of really appreciate about the work and try and still, like, bestow in some of the conversations that I'm raising. But, yeah, I think also, like, during the pandemic, you know, so much of what she wrote in the parable was, like, literally happening and still is. Yes. And I think that also allowed for an entry point for a lot of people. It's like, when you're actually, like, having school in your living room. Yes. And I think, Ayana, like, you pointed that out to me as, like, that's literally a one-to-one with, like, what was being experienced at the time. So I feel like things like that maybe allowed people to realize that they needed to invest in this work, but then it's also like, is it too late? Like, the warnings she gave us are like, it's the year, like, she wrote it, you know, 30 years ago, and it's like, okay, now you're reading it. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know what to tell you.
I mean, there's that climate futures aspect, and you touch on something that's really interesting. We've talked about how people are used to a formula where they're going to have the happily ever after, they're going to feel a certain type of way at the end, but the way you feel is hopeful because someone else is recognizing that stuff is going down and that we need to have some actions and we need to have plans and we need to form coalition. We need to see who our neighbors are and how we can mutually survive and collaborate. The other thing that came up when y'all were talking is in terms of, like, there's a beautifully curated library inside the exhibit. Yes. Where children or people of all ages can go and, like, look at a book or kind of check out a book and read in the space, because there's a cool story for y'all that don't know. Octavia Butler, when she finally got her library card, she read all the books in the Peter Pan library in the children's section by the time she was about 12. Yeah. And you weren't allowed to go to the grown-up section until you were 14. So she said it was insulting her intelligence, and therefore she stopped going to the library for 2 years. The other thing that happened is she said she had never read a book by a Black person ever. So she read all those children's books, and she didn't find herself represented. And so that's one of the things, those aspects of her young life, like that she was such a voracious reader and you know, a good friend to her other peers who were writing. I wonder if you all could talk about your impressions of the exhibit as you experienced it last night, because this also is the first time that they've been to San Diego, even though Lynell and I have been working on this project in collaboration with our other folks. I just sort of want your impressions, because I think even though some of the published works are very serious and heavy, there's also something underneath that we've tried to tap into for the exhibit. I wonder if you could just talk about that in the context of being a little brown kid in Pasadena and what we have at the museum, because that's it's very cool. What do you think?
The first thing that hit me as I was going through it is that I would have loved to have been able to climb into that treehouse if I was a little kid, you know? And so I'm, like, trying to lean in and trying to see, you know? But really, even though I know the exhibit is focused on children, it pierced my heart as an adult. It went right to my child, little Lynell. It really did. And the bus in particular, you know, moving on that bus and watching the smear of landscape, the colors, the houses, the shapes of the houses. I think about the way it reminded me of sitting either on the bus or in the back seat of my parents' car and looking, because I couldn't see out, so I was only looking at shapes and colors. My senses were really just all lit up. It was emotional also. I can't wait to go back and spend some more time moving through the library. I did want to go, like, I can't jostle people out of the way. But things like that. It was, yeah, it goes right to the heart of the matter for me.
Yeah, I feel like the kids that will get to experience it are super lucky.
Yeah.
And that was my first time at the museum. The museum as a whole, I was really impressed by, like, just the scale of, like, interaction and, I don't know, the sort of marrying of, like, contemporary artists and children being able to, like, actually play on these installations. Like, I thought it was such a cool place. And yeah, I think similarly, like, I wish my childhood self could have experienced something like that. And with the Octavia Butler installation, like, I think just the way that, I thought it was really clever the way you pulled certain things from her writing or from her life, such as the bus, as you mentioned, or like the typewriter, and almost like the typewriter is powering the bus is kind of how I thought about it.
Beautifully put.
Yeah, and I think there's so many allusions to, like, how she thought about writing as a sort of, like, life force for her throughout her life. And I think trying to, like, inspire this sort of creative autonomy in children, I think, is really cool. I love the giant book. You can take a photo of yourself in the book, literally write yourself into the story, as Butler always did. And I did go into the tree.
You did go
last night.
Man it!
Because it was the opening, so there weren't as many kids. Okay. So I actually was able to go.
So we're gonna go scare them away.
There are actually 2 spaces that you could crawl in. An American was squinched into the smaller one. I have a photo that I took of us and Iyadi, our triplicate, that co-curators. It just brings out a sense of joy and wonder, I think, but also, like, innocence and hopefulness that we don't get in other places. It's been a very interesting process. We collaborated with young people, and I think it's the future of education. It's the future of museums. It's the future of what I've called Octavia Butler Studies. This is like a whole new avenue. And so it's wonderful for people to get to experience it. And I would love to, we're on this beautiful slide right here. Yes. And it'll come around again. I'm a native of Pasadena, and I've lived all my life in the LA area, so I care about the parts of the world I care about or where it seems to be needed, right? So I think that's sort of this ethics of care that she had, that it wasn't just like, oh, I'm gonna be successful, I'm gonna be a best-selling writer. She has this whole litany for survival where she's talking about the things that she would do for folks. And in almost every book, she's like, oh, I sent my nephew to college with this money that I got. And then in my brain, I'm like, wait, I don't think she had siblings, so it's not a real nephew. But for me, she does that in the world. Yeah. So I wonder if you could talk about something that you hope that your work will instill, and maybe if this exhibit helps you to think about your work in a different way, since Butler's work is not usually associated with young folks, even though many of her stories are coming of age. I just wonder if anything's been sparked for you. And I want to say as an aside, I feel very impressed with our work because American has exhibited and traveled to many, many museums all over the world. And so I think there's something special at the New Children's Museum. Do you want to go first this time, maybe?
Sure. I think one thing that was clarified to me seeing this installation and the museum as a whole is like what are the sort of differences between what artwork attempts to create or evoke amongst like an adult audience versus like a kid's audience? And like in some ways there's I feel like many more things possible in the kid space because like people are really literally playing with their full body on the things, and usually in like adult art exhibitions it's very austere, it's very like contemplative, but I'm also like, but what else is possible? Like, is there something I like, just thinking about the kind of impact this exhibition would have on a child where it's very formative and could really shift your thinking going forward. Like, how do you create that kind of interaction for an adult who's already very like set in their ways and is not as open to having their mind change? Like, how can you still like plant a seed or have that kind of shift? And I think that's something I'm often trying to do in the work that I do. I describe my work as thought experiments, so things that can kind of like make you think deeper about a given thing. So yeah, I don't know. That's something I'm trying to do. I think also like more generally, like trying to create more space for people like myself to make art. I think in my case, I feel lucky that there are many Black conceptual artists that have already kind of created a path, but I think there's always so much more that can be done. And so I'm trying to do that in my small ways.
Right. I mean, you have students. And here's another weird aside. I go to the school that I got a degree from. An American went there, but obviously not at the same time because one of us is older. But I teach there at the school where I was a student, where American also went. So, you know, I time travel every day because I still have colleagues who are my professors who are probably like, dang it, every time I walk up, like, now I feel so old. But I do think it's interesting that kids from a state school who went to public schools can end up being in these beautiful places like this now. I think, like, working class students, she really advocated for working class people having access to things that, like free libraries and public education and childcare and things that, even if you don't personally need it, it's a resource that everyone needs. Right. What do you think about your current projects or directions or things that are sparked for you?
I think what really, really struck me, especially in the many, many months, which turned into years in that archive, of the importance of asking lots of questions, even if you don't articulate them out, if they don't get outside of you. But she constantly was asking questions of herself, of the world around her, trying to answer them. Some questions that just tailed her for a lifetime. And that curiosity is what got me into journalism. I know I did not plan to be a journalist. I knew I wanted to write. I knew I loved to read. I didn't know what to do with it. And the constant question asking, the queries, the going deeper, being in the world, interacting with people, she had to make herself that person. She was incredibly shy. That's the part of the self-making that really, really, really spoke to me as a young person who sometimes felt like, oh, I don't have anything to offer. Or that's not true. It really was, no one thought I had anything to offer. And I was trying to push not to absorb that. She created a persona. Even when she was being belittled or pushed aside, she found a way to put herself in a place and ask questions. And that's so important to me. And that's what I want young people to be able to walk away with, is like, there's gonna be all kinds of buzzing around you, and there are gonna be so many people who are gonna tell you, I'm not sure if you're ready yet, or we'll work on that story later, or that community isn't important. And she kept going. And I had to do the same thing. And I think it's really important for young people to know that not everybody's gonna be open arms. Not everybody, all the people who love Octavia now, you know, they wouldn't have known about Octavia before, but look what happened. And she did that. She did that.
That's a great segue for you all to start to move around a little bit and talk to your neighbor and sort of peer review your question. Like, what are your comments? Because I don't want any inquiries that are like, this is more of a comment. Save those for your neighbor. So turn around and talk to the people that are near you and sort of say what your questions are and like what your impressions are. And then we will have, take about 2 minutes, and then we're going to collect your card. So make sure it's a question that maybe someone else has. We won't be able to answer them all, but if you talk to people around you and see like what kinds of questions would you all sort of vote on the island to ask us? Was science fiction a radical way of creating a better future? I just love that question. And I think that's a great theme. Maybe you can sort of answer that about whether or not you think about Butler's relationship to science fiction as a genre, I guess, and a way of creating a better future. What do you think?
Me or American? American?
I remember her, maybe you can like fill in the gaps, but I remember her describing like, I think 3 types of sci-fi. There's like the if then, or like.
I got you.
You got me.
So the 3 types of science fiction are what if,
Right.
If only, and if this goes on.
Right.
What if only, and if this goes on.
Should I elaborate? What is it? What if is like, yeah, what if such thing happens, or what if we had such thing, and then if only is like, if only we had this thing, how would things be? And then if this goes on, which I think many of her books were, or particularly the Parable series, is like, as I said, like a cautionary tale. Like, if this goes on, these are the sort of like stakes of contemporary life that will be raised. And yeah, I think as far as can sci-fi like create or I don't remember the question, create a transformative like idea of what's possible, I think it can speculate that or like provoke a change, perhaps. I think it's still in the realm of like, I guess, ideation or provocation. Like I don't know, I don't necessarily like the idea of people trying to replicate what's happening in sci-fi, which like there's a lot of like, you know, these tech CEOs that kind of like fantasize and lust over sci-fi aesthetics, and that's like their goalpost for like what the future is supposed to look like. And I think that's actually really reductive as like a mindset. But I think when sci-fi can actually like I don't know, get that idea out so we can say, okay, maybe we don't want that. Like maybe there's other ways we can think about this. And I actually feel there's so many other narratives that could be written outside of like the tropes of sci-fi that we often see. And so, I don't know, maybe the more people writing it, the more alternatives we'll encounter.
I'll just tag onto this to say because this is so true about tropes, and you know, I think about how she said about Kindred, well, history is another planet. I'm going to write about history as a planet. I'm creating a world back in time. I'm going to go back and kind of poke at that, examine that, ask questions. I think about I can't remember if this is in a journal or in a speech where she's talking about how narrow publishing's categories were and where she fit, where people thought she could fit and couldn't fit. You know, why couldn't she write history? Why couldn't she write sociology? So she picked science fiction because it had a little bit more elasticity for her to play with history and politics and all these things she loved and she was naturally good at. So, yes, radical.
Yes, those are wonderful answers. And this other question is a little bit technical, but I do want to touch on this because Butler coined this phrase for herself. She said she called herself a histofuturist, and this person is asking, why did Octavia call herself a histofuturist? And as a partner question about sports that I cannot answer, I know that she went to football games because she would work during the Rose Bowl game on New Year's Day. But I don't know about baseball.
I didn't say baseball.
Yeah, I don't know about baseball, but I do think that's a good question because maybe there will be sports in the future. Like, that's another possibility. Like, we don't think about those things. It says, why did Octavia call herself a histofuturist? And someone in the audience probably knows, and I'm going to flub this, but she basically says a histofuturist in the 1980s, I think 1983 or 85, is a person who extrapolates from the known human past and present, right, about the technological past and present. But I think what she also meant is what you mentioned, is like social science fiction, not just hard science, shiny machine, space opera fiction, but like the things that make us connected to the natural world and to one another. So what do you think about her calling herself a histofuturist, especially since there's another term that people love to say and assign to her that I don't think that she necessarily identified with, and even I myself, people have said, Ayana, write this thing, but use this word. And then I always like say, like, this is not my favorite word, but she called herself this. This is how she named herself. And the importance of naming oneself in one's own work. I think that's also the question. And then, Yadi, I think we'll need more questions, and we have time for more. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I know the word you're referring to, and you're not going to say it.
Nope.
But I want to say a different term that has that term inside of it, which is this one that Martine Sims came up with, which was, she wrote the Mundane Afrofuturist Manifesto, which I felt was sort of like a bit of a critique of Afrofuturism, but it sort of insists on the mundanity of a lot of the things that are extrapolated and like basically the way that a lot of these ideas that we see in sci-fi show up in our lives are very mundane, you know, like bureaucratic political power, the way it's wielded against us, you know, the way that a lot of the like more concerning aspects of, you know, future technologies like predictive policing, for example, actually shows up in the most like mundane and like insidious ways that aren't spectacular. So I think like a refusal for like the spectacular in how we think about the future, I think is really something that resonates with me.
Right. I think what I said before, really the whole idea of history being a planet, and also that she really was, it just slipped out of my head what I was going to say, because I was thinking about, whenever somebody would say to her, oh, you're clairvoyant, you're seer, she would stop them. No, I'm just paying attention to what is going on, the present, the past, and I am just spinning it into the future to see and asking those questions. So it's always this back and forth and back and forth, and that it is important to have an eye and your feet in the past and the present to think about what the future will be.
Excellent. I think she's also kind of saying, like, do we really want the thing that we're cultivating right now?
Right.
Because if we keep watering these invasive plants, we're not going to have any more food in the garden, or clean water, or gasoline, or garbage pickup, like those mundane things.
Right.
Your house burns, and you can no longer call the fire department, which leads me to my next question, which is, what is your favorite Butler book? I think that's a great question. And I hope you ask your neighbors that question too, like when we get up later. Do you all have a favorite book of the ones you've read so far? Or I guess interview or essay?
I've been saying Kindred is my favorite, because I love like seeing the plantation dynamics, like, I don't know, all the different ways that people interact and like how they fit your expectations or don't. Like, I think it's really complex. It's almost like a social experiment that she wrote out. But I'm right now I'm reading Clay's Arc, and I'm almost done with it, and I'm really like into it too. But it's totally different. It's really, really intense.
I always say Kindred too because it was my door in. But as Ayana knows I'm an essayist, and so I love the essays that are in Bloodchild, and in particular. And I love the fact that you get, at the end of each short story and essay, you get her reflecting back on what the writing was of that story or that essay, and what she would change or what she would not change, or where she might go. And I love having like a little window in on what a writer might do if they had a little extra time to go back and tweak.
And that reminds me, as far as essays, like the one you introduced me to, the monophobic response, has become really impactful, where she's kind of talking about the human need to like have aliens as this like this kind of like abstract savior / villain that we desire, but it's like actually we just need to sort of face the fact of the reality that all of these differences and these contentions we create between each other on Earth. And so it's this sort of like insistence to like actually focus on these like differences that we fabricate, you know, in order to continue like violence, and rather than just having this like, oh, there's aliens out there that are the thing we need to worry about, but it's actually we need to focus on what's going on here.
Yes, and there's a joke on the interwebs that says like the aliens are just gonna fly by, and they're like, we don't want anything to do with them. They're a mess. They're a mess. Let's just keep on going. But yes, I do love those essays and her little commentary at the end too. It's like she's telling you as an aside what she put into there. And I think this is a question that we sort of touched on. I want you all to, I'm asking this question of you, then I'm asked one final question that we can briefly answer. So ask yourselves how Butler's work has changed your sensibility and your way of being in the world. For us, this is our great segue to the end question. Given the success of the Octavia Butler exhibit, what do we envision could be next for the collective to elevate the message or story of Butler's early inspirations and how they show up in the world? Mm-hmm. And that will be our outro, and then we'll be done.
When I think about Octavia's life and I think about the things that she felt was missing, and we talked a little bit about this morning, she really yearned for a community, very, very much so. She had it. It took a while to stitch it together, but what I think about the beauty of this project, it's gonna create community. It's gonna continue to create community. And I'm hoping there's a possibility to build on that, to give people who wouldn't ordinarily have an easy place to fit in, they have it. There's a common bond through different ways. It could be through her work, it could be through art, it could be through writing, it could be through gardening and planting and understanding why things grow here and not there, and these kinds of conversations. That would be my hope, is to be able to build on what has already been planted.
Yeah, I would say for myself in the work that I've been doing, I've been really trying to like map what she was writing about onto our reality, and sort of like just making that one connection that I think is already present, sort of like really manifest and like visible. And I think particularly I'm thinking about with the Earthseed community and their like desire to go to the stars or to space, and what it means for like a community of Black and brown people that aren't, you know, wealthy billionaires to like have a desire to go to space, and like what are other reasons to go to space other than like a colonial imperial impulse. And not that I'm like totally sold on that yet, but I think it's interesting to like posit that. And I think at this moment where we're seeing like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos like really trying to like colonize Mars and like I'm trying to think about how her work can be used to sort of like feel this critical, reflective narrative on like what that actually means, because I feel like we're all sort of bystanders, but like maybe we can actually have a stake in like, you know, not popularizing that as like what space and sci-fi is all about, you know, like maybe it's actually about us and our community relations and like what we want to, we want our lives to be or something.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Dream.
That's a
How to
wonderful.
dream.
How to dream, and also that we are already among the stars, and that we are the destiny. Like we're already the community, and we can connect with one another in order to have the future we want. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Really enjoyed talking with you.